Okay, if you want to get your Bibles and go to the book of 1 Samuel, if I were to ask you what book of the Bible we read about Samuel in, would that be a hard question? Now, it could be a trick question, right? You may have to think through that, but we read about Samuel in the book of 1 Samuel. Now, we don't read about Samuel in the book of 2 Samuel. And that may be kind of tricky to you, wondering why we've got two books named Samuel and we don't read about them in both books, but that's perhaps a class for another time. But so tonight we're studying in here about prophets who didn't write a book. We introduced this last week, talking about the fact that sometimes when we study prophets in a Bible class, we might study the major prophets, might study the minor prophets, because those are the guys we think of when we think about studying prophets, but maybe we don't think about, all right, were there prophets in the Bible who maybe didn't write a book per se, but they were still prophets nonetheless? And there were several, and we're not going to be able to study all of them in this class, but I'm going to try to pick a few that I think will be interesting for us to look at and to gather, not just gather information, but to gather application. Say, what does this have to do with me? What difference does it make that God tells us about Samuel? We know a good bit about Samuel. If I were to ask you, besides verses you could quote, what do you know about the prophet Habakkuk? What do you know about him personally? You know much about him? You're like, I can't even spell his name. What do I know? We know very little about him personally, but he wrote a book of the Bible. What do you know about Samuel? You know anything about him? Where he came from, who his parents were, when he was born, anything as a child. I mean, we know a lot of, we don't know everything, but we know a lot of information about him. Now, he's not the first prophet. We'll talk more about this in a second. He's not the first prophet. We talked last week that obviously Moses was a prophet. Abraham's called a prophet. Enoch is called a prophet. But basically, what did a prophet do? What was their function? To educate. What is a prophet? Is somebody who spoke for someone else. So it's somebody. Remember that Moses was told by God, Aaron's going to be your prophet. You're going to be to him God, and he's going to be your prophet. What does that mean? Because Moses was saying, what excuse was Moses making about his mouth? Oh, I don't speak so well. Yeah, you actually do. Who made your mouth is what God said to him. But here, let me take your excuse away. I'm going to send you your own prophet. What is he doing? I'm sending you your own mouthpiece. Somebody who's going to speak for you, and that's Aaron. And so a prophet's basic job is to speak for another. And so God's prophets were individuals, not necessarily predicting the future, that's what we often think, but somebody who's speaking for God and conveying God's information. So I want us to think about Samuel tonight. And Samuel he had a lot of different hats, fulfilled a lot of different roles. We're talking about him as a prophet, but I want you to think for just a second, he was also a judge, and he was also a priest. I mean, this guy's getting paid the big bucks, right? He's got a lot of titles. I mean, he's got a lot of, no, he's not making big bucks, I don't think, but think about what roles did he have? If I were to ask you to name the 15 judges. I'm not going to. Some of you just were like, please don't. If I were to ask you to name the 15 judges, and I were giving you a clue that it starts with Othniel, that's your first one, could you name all 15? Probably the two individuals that grew up with Bible drills and Bible flashcards could name them, all right? Now, you get to the end of, and so Othniel, first one. You get to the end of that list of 15, who's the last one? Samuel. And so you go from Othniel, but he's not in the book of Judges. Does that bother you? Does it bother you that you have the book of Judges, and so that's where all of the judges should fit, right? Except you have two judges that don't fit there. Who was the judge right before Samuel? The old judge, Eli. And then there's Samuel, and both of those are in the book of 1 Samuel. But I want you to think for just a minute about Samuel being a judge. What does that mean? What was a judge's responsibility. Okay? What was their overseer? What was their responsibility? Sometimes you think of a judge, and what do you think about? Somebody with a robe on, right? They're sitting on a high elevated platform. They've got a gavel in their hands. They're making rulings. Okay. Maybe that was an element of what some of the judges did, but that wasn't the extent of it. What else did they do? Think about a judge named Gideon. When you think about Gideon, do you think about Gideon wearing a robe and fake hair and a gavel in his hand? What do you think about when you think about Gideon? These judges come along in this cycle, and think about this other word that starts with a D for judge. They were deliverers. God's people became enslaved they became oppressed at least to these foreign nations. And after a while, they decided, hey, why are we oppressed them? We have a God who loves us. They cry out to God, and God sends a judge to do what? To deliver them from this oppression. And so that was their role, was to continually delivering God's people, and so they would be at peace for a period of time until the judge died, and then they go through that all again. So here comes Samuel. Samuel's role as a judge is very similar, is again to deliver God's people. Is he going to make some judgments for them? And the verse is on the screen. Look in chapter 7, just to see that. Sometimes people say, how do you know that he was a judge? Well, look at the end of chapter 7, verse 6. Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. Look in verse 15 of chapter 7. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. So there's one hat that he wears. But maybe another hat we don't often think about when it comes to Samuel is that he was also a priest. And that might kind of throw us a little bit, because we have another image of what a priest is, another idea of even what an Old Testament priest was, and maybe Samuel doesn't fit that mold, but Samuel was a priest. In 1 Chronicles, we learn that he is from the household of Kohath, who is a son of Levi, the tribe from which all of the priests came. So as we go through this story about Samuel, we're going to find a man who, when he was a child, he was wearing an ephod. What's that? It's a garment that a priest would wear. Well, why is he wearing it? Well, because that's the line, the lineage that he comes from. And hopefully before the end of class, or near the end of class, we're going to have time to get over to chapter 13, where Samuel offers an animal sacrifice. Well, who's got the right to offer sacrifices in the Old Testament? Priest. Well, that's got to be a priest. So here's a man, he's a deliverer, he's a judge, the last one in the line of judges. Now, we'll get to this in a second, but why was he why wasn't there another judge after him? Why was it 1 through 15, and did God just get tired of having judges? Or who came along to rule over God's people? Kings. Was that God's idea? All right, so here they've got these judges, and we'll look in chapter 8 in just a couple minutes, where the people demanded a king, so they don't want judges anymore. You know why they didn't want judges anymore? Samuel had 2 sons. And you get to chapter 8, Samuel had 2 sons. And he had appointed both of them as judges. Sounds like he's got the problem solved, right? Because it says Samuel's old, he's got his successors in place, his sons are set up as judges. What's wrong with it? Let me be more specific. What's wrong with his sons? They're corrupt. The people come and say, your sons are corrupt. I mean, seriously? You're going to die, leave us behind with these corrupt guys? No, that's not going to work. And so they demanded a king. So that's why he's the last judge, because you have a different ruling system coming into place. He's also a priest, but he's also a prophet. And so many different roles that Samuel is fulfilling here. Look in chapter 3. Look in chapter 3, verse 1. I was going to get to this later, but we may not have time. Chapter 3, verse 1. The boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation. So we'll talk about this in a minute, but prophecy was not going on a lot, very much, before and leading up to the time of Samuel. Look at verse 20. So you get to the end of the chapter. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. You're going to read that a lot in the Old Testament. From Dan to Beersheba. What does that mean for Israel? From north to south. We would say from sea to shining sea. What is that? From California to the Carolinas, from North Dakota to Florida. So Dan is at the very northern extremity. Beersheba, so that's just saying geographically, for all of Israel, knew that Samuel had been established as a prophet of the Lord. So I want you to see the transition that takes place right here in chapter 3. It goes from a period of time when there weren't prophets coming and prophesying, chapter 3, verse 1. You get to the end of the chapter, and what does everybody know? Oh, we got prophets now. And Samuel's been established as a prophet of the Lord. But go over to the book of Acts for just a second. I want you to see this transition, and it's funny how you get over into the New Testament and you're still learning things in the New Testament about the Old Testament. And the reason is because the verses that are on the screen in chapter 13 and chapter 3 are sermons that are being preached in the book of Acts, and the sermons they're preaching are all from using the Old Testament to give history and to prove Jesus is the Son of God. Look in chapter 13, verse 20 first. Acts chapter 13, verse 20. It's hard not to put this into context. You go back up, God's people, verse 17, were strangers in the land of Egypt. Verse 18, for a period of about 40 years, he put up with their ways in the wilderness. Verse 19, he destroyed 7 nations to bring them into the promised land. Verse 20, after they conquered the promised land, he gave them judges. Until who? Until Samuel. So God's giving, Paul is preaching the sermon, but God's giving this chronological history of Israel, and he says you've got the judges for several hundred years until. And so here's a transitional figure named Samuel, who's now going to bring in this period of prophecy, a heavy period of prophecy. Go back to chapter 3. Again, this is just to kind of put everything into context, scriptural, biblically speaking. Look in chapter 3, Acts chapter 3, verse 24. In Acts chapter 3, Peter quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 22 and 23. He identifies Jesus as the prophet that they were expecting to come. And then he says in verse 24, yes, and all the prophets from Samuel and those who follow, as many have spoken, also have foretold these days. So what does it sound like in the book of Acts they're saying about Samuel as far as a line of prophets? As far as judges go, he's the last. But as far as prophets go, they're putting him as the beginning point of a period of prophets. Now, again, he's not the first prophet. There are prophets before him. But when you start with Samuel, all of a sudden, there is going to be a period of revelation from God that is continuous. Think about your Old Testament history here. You have Samuel, who's going to be on the scene. He's going to, we'll look at this in a minute, he's going to anoint kings. The second king he's going to anoint is David. Was David a prophet? Now, I know you're going to say, well, he was a king. He was a shepherd. He was a prophet. He spoke for God. Peter calls him a prophet in Acts chapter 2. I think it's in 2 weeks. I can't remember my time frame here. But in 3 weeks anyway. We're going to talk about some prophets that were David's prophets. Can you think of a prophet who David talked to a lot or who talked to David? Nathan? All right. So there's another non-writing prophet. All right. So you're going to progress. There's going to be non-writing prophets in the time of Solomon after David. And then Solomon's kingdom is divided, and you get into a period of where you have Isaiah and Micah. So from Samuel, almost continuously, all the way through Malachi, you're going to have prophets. speaking for God. So that's why Samuel's kind of in a pivotal transitional period here. And so think about this. You get to the end of the book of Malachi. How long is it from Malachi until Jesus comes, roughly? Good, 400 years. All right, so from about Malachi till Jesus comes, you have 400 years. And if you study Bible history, usually those 400 years, sometimes they're going to be called the 400 silent years. What do you mean silent years? Because we just had hundreds of years of God speaking through prophets and prophets and prophets. And when Malachi is finished, the pen goes down, and for 400 years, God's not speaking. When John the Baptist comes on the scene, you want to know why John the Baptist was getting all of the people's attention as much as he was? We haven't heard from God in 400 years. And all of a sudden, this guy comes along and he says, I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. And it's like, whoa, God's speaking to us again. And boom, 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 boom. They're coming out to hear John the Baptist preparing, and no wonder Jesus had the people following him. So, Samuel is and that's why Acts 3, Acts 13, Samuel is kind of put in this pivotal role of starting a great period of prophecy. Again, prophecy not predicting the future necessarily, but just God communicating directly with his people. All right, I've done a lot of talking there. Anybody got any thoughts, questions, comments on any of that? Okay, so how do you raise a prophet? Who raised this prophet? Go back to 1 Samuel chapter 1. So you're introduced in 1 Samuel chapter 1 to two godly individuals who are going to be Samuel's parents. Who are they? Elkanah, and her name rhymes with Elkanah. Hannah. All right, so they're going to be his parents. They're going to raise this prophet. Now, we said last week that prophets were not come through succession. It wasn't something that they just inherited a role like the priest did. A priest was born in the tribe of Levi, or a baby was born in the tribe of Levi, and they could be a priest because of their birthright in the tribe of Levi. But a prophet didn't become a prophet that way. A prophet was selected by God. So in 1 Samuel chapter 1, how many children does Hannah have? Doesn't have any children. So they go to Shiloh, and while they are there, Hannah goes in to pray, and what does she pray for? She prays to have a child. She's selfish, isn't he? I mean, she's just like, give me a baby, give me a baby. You think that's true? Is she selfish? Exactly. What does she say? God, if you give me this son, what is she going to do with him? Does that make sense to you? God, you give me the baby and I'll give him back to you. Well, then why am I going to give you the baby to start with if you're just going to give him back to me? No, that's not the thought process there. But what a woman, isn't it? It says, Lord, if you'll allow me to have a baby, I will give him back. Now here's the tricky part. How long did she say that she was going to give him back? Was just like for a couple. Look in chapter 1, verse 22. So in chapter 1, verse 22, they have the baby. And Elkanah is going back up to Shiloh, to the house of the Lord, because verse 21, they do that every year. And so he goes to Hannah and says, all right, honey, it's time to go. She says in verse 22, not yet. Not until the child is weaned. And then I will take him, the end of verse 22 says, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there for how long? Not just, not until, just for a few years. I'm going to give him back to the Lord. I'm going to give him back to the Lord to remain with him forever. What kind of parent does that? Somebody who loves the Lord? What kind of parent can say, Lord, if you'll just allow me to have a child, I'm going to turn right back around and give him to you. So he's weaned. We don't know the age. Some would say maybe 4 or 5 years old. Takes him to takes him back to Shiloh. Now, she gives him to the Lord. Into whose physical hands does she give him? Eli. How would you like to have been Eli? Now you've got a little boy. Now, in your mind, is this boy well behaved? In my mind, Samuel's well behaved. Maybe I'll get to heaven and find out that he was a typical boy, and he wasn't. But now Eli has the responsibility of raising this little boy. How good of a job does he do? With Samuel, how good of a job does he do? Pretty good. How good of a job did he do with his own sons, Hophni and Phinehas? Horrible. Well, what made the difference with Samuel? The Bible doesn't tell us, so we're not giving it. But what made the difference with Samuel? What do you think?
He was from God.
Different child, right? What does the name Samuel mean? Do you know what it means? Gift of God, heard of God. Here I am, somebody that I have a child that's been given to me by the Lord. And so, how often did Hannah get to see her child? Once a year. That'd be tough, wouldn't it? Brought him a new coat every year, and perhaps it was that continual bond that continued to help him to be raised. So let me ask a question, and I know not everybody in here is parents. Some of us are grandparents, parents. Some of us may never have any opportunity to be either one. Here was a woman who was determined to raise her child for the Lord. That was her number one priority from before he was even conceived. I'm going to raise this child for the Lord. Can I ask you a question? Is there some other reason to raise a child than for the Lord? Well, I want to have kids so that they can take care of me when I get old. Good forethought there. I mean, somebody's got to take care of you when you get old. All right. Is that why I have kids? I want to have kids. Why do we have? Here's Hannah, who wants to have a child so that there's another servant of the Lord on the earth. What do we raise our children to do? Do we raise them to play sports? Do we raise them to get a good job? Do we raise them to, and you fill in the blank for every reason under the sun that children are raised today, do we raise them to be servants of the Lord?
We try.
I hope we do. Do we raise boys with planting seeds, maybe more than even that, into their hearts? One day you need to be a preacher. One day you need to be an elder. We plant all sorts. Boy, we get out here and practice. Boy, you're going to be a great second baseman. Okay. Boy, I mean, if you stay good in school and you keep getting good grades, boy, you're going to become an accountant. And okay. Why not put thoughts in their head about serving the Lord for the rest of their life? That was Hannah. And God gifted her a son. God gifted her a son in order to do that. Any thoughts, comments, questions? All right, so you got to jump in if you're going to say something. So Samuel goes to live with Eli. Now remember, a prophet he doesn't inherit this position. He is chosen by the Lord to be a prophet. So look in chapter 3. Samuel's a boy. And you know what happens in chapter 3 when he starts hearing sounds in the middle of the night. Did your children ever come into your room because they were hearing sounds in their bedroom? There's monsters under the bed, right? Very rare, verse 1 says, for the word of the Lord to come in these days. So if the word of the Lord was not coming to anybody very much in these days, Samuel wouldn't be expecting it, would he? He wouldn't be expecting the Lord to come and talk. The Lord doesn't talk to people, hasn't been talking to people directly in this time frame. And so it would be unusual for him to even consider that he might hear the voice of the Lord. But you start in chapter 3 and verse 1. And what does the Lord do? He calls him by name, right? And so what does Samuel do when the Lord calls him? He goes into Eli. Here I am. What does Eli say?
I didn't call you.
Buddy, don't wake me up. I didn't call you. Go back to bed. 3 times. 3 times. Samuel, Samuel. Goes to Eli. Here I am. Go back to bed. Samuel, Samuel. Here I am. 3 times. 3rd time, Eli gets woken up. Eli's like, all right, this is real. Your kids ever come to you and they were telling you a story and you're like, this isn't even real. I mean, there are no monsters under your bed. Go back to bed. I mean, you knew there were no monsters. But the 3rd time Eli hears, okay, all right, I'm connecting the dots here. Something's going on. What did he tell Samuel to say? Speak, Lord. Servant hears. And so here comes the Lord. Does the Lord come back the 4th time? Or did the Lord say 3 strikes and you're out, Samuel? Wouldn't that have been something? Comes back the 4th time. And here's this young, did he have any, do you think he had any idea what he was volunteering for? Here I am, Lord.
No.
Use me. Send me. Similar terms that Isaiah would say, obviously. And so what was the message? Remember, a prophet is somebody who speaks for God, speaks for another in generally, but a prophet of God was somebody who speaks for God. What was the very first revelation that God gives to this boy? If you were God, you wouldn't have chosen this message. If you were God and you're like, this is the first message I'm going to give a boy, let's start him out easy. I mean, let's just see how he does. You know, let's let him get his feet wet a little bit here. No, God throws him in the deep end. Does he? What's the first message? This man Eli, who is raising you, what does he tell him? Verse 11. Lord said to Samuel, behold, I will do something in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. Verse 12, in that day I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. Verse 13, for I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows. He knows about what his sons are doing because his sons made themselves vile and, he did not restrain them. It's not just that Eli knew they were doing this. What had Eli done about it? Zip. He hadn't done anything. Therefore, I've sworn to verse 14, sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of his house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. Wow. You're Samuel and you just got that laid upon you. And so the very next verse says what? Samuel lay down until morning. And Eli, the next morning, says, what'd the Lord tell you? What'd Samuel say initially? Do you think Samuel was eager to just come right out with it? Can you imagine being Samuel? But from the get-go, he is the spokesman of God, and he's going to tell whatever God said. Are some of God's messages harder to tell other people than others? Some messages are perhaps kind of easy. But when God chose his prophets, many of the messages that he had them to convey to his people were pretty hard. And the very first one that Samuel gets is a pretty hard message to convey to somebody that he loves about what's going to happen to his own children. But Samuel was faithful to the message. Are there some hard things that we need to convey to people that God has said? Do we just kind of skirt around those? Oh, I'm just going to kind of avoid those. We might eventually end up there. Or if God said it, do I need to say, this is what God says? Not be ashamed of it, not shy away from it, and say, look, this is what the Bible says. You had conversations with people that they got upset with you because of what you said the Bible, they got upset with you. because of what you're showing, and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't say that. It's just what the Bible says. But if it's what the Bible says, what's my responsibility? I just got to show what it says. Even if it's difficult, I've got to make sure that I'm just like Samuel, that I'm faithful to what God says. And so look in verse 19, chapter 3, verse 19. Samuel grew, the Lord was with him. By the way, I love what Eli says in verse 18. I've got it underlined in my Bible. Eli hears this report about his family, and what did Eli do? Yeah, that's typical of God. He's just, is that his response? No, let the Lord do what seems good to him. What a response. What a humble, if that's what is good in the sight of God. Sometimes we define what's good. We just need to let God define what's good. But anyway, verse 19, Samuel grew, Lord was with him. What does this mean at the end of the verse? New King James says that God let none of his words fall to the ground. What does that mean? So Samuel's out speaking the word, because remember, verse 20 says he's established as a prophet of the Lord. Chapter 4, verse 1 says the word of Samuel came to all of Israel. What does it mean that the Lord did not let his words fall to the ground? Say it again, Tom. Boy, you nailed it. He did not allow his words to go unfulfilled. Remember in Deuteronomy 18, God says, here's how you tell a true prophet from a false prophet. False prophet says something. If it doesn't happen, you know it's false. So how do you know if how do you know if a prophet's true? If he says something's going to happen, and it happens. Samuel's out here speaking for God, and everything he says is true. Everything he says is validated, proven to be. God doesn't let anything. Why? Because these are God's words. Of course they can be true. He doesn't let any of his words fail. You got the word fall, it's the same as the word fail. He doesn't let any of those words fail. They are true. Remember Isaiah. God said through Isaiah that his word would not return unto him void. Same kind of concept here. 5 minutes. All right, I only have 5 more points to get through. Any thoughts here? Okay, so here's his role as a prophet. And maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this is the extent. Look in chapter 7. And maybe this will help you to see some of the roles that Samuel has here in chapter 7. There's a lot of history that takes place between where we were just in chapter 3 and chapter 7. In fact, you've got 20 years. Look in chapter 7, verse 2. You see the time marker of 20 years there. You've got at least 20 years that have passed. The Philistines had taken the Ark of the Covenant. How'd that work out for the Philistines? They had the Ark of the Covenant. They thought, great, we're going to win battles. We've defeated Israel. We took their Ark. And how'd that work out for them? Well, not so good. They're like, take it back, take it back, take it back. We don't want it. Israel gets the ark back, but they don't bring it back to Shiloh. They go and park it in Kirjath Jearim at the end of chapter 6, and it stays there for 20 years. So they're not faithfully following the Lord. And so Samuel comes along, and Samuel's going to fulfill, look at these 3 roles. Remember we already talked about this? Prophet, priest, judge. And he fulfills all of those roles right here in this chapter. Chapter 7, verse 2. It had been 20 years, so 20 years has passed. They don't have the ark of God. That's a problem. If you don't have the ark of God there in the tabernacle where it belongs, then you're not doing what God wants you to do. You don't have the presence of God right there among the people. So what did Samuel do in verse 3 of chapter 7? He spoke to all the people. Isn't that what a prophet does? So in my Bible, next to verse 3, I've just got the word prophet written. Because Samuel got up and he spoke. Here's what the Lord says. If you return to the Lord, what does that say? They're not where they should be. They've got to get back there. If you return to the Lord with all your heart, you put away the foreign gods, you prepare your heart, you serve Him only, He will deliver you. And so verse 5, he gathered them all together. And here's what a priest would do. I'm going to pray for you. What does a prophet do? Here's God, here's the people. And a prophet speaks to the people from God. What does a priest do? Remember, here's God, here's the people. The prophet is the one who speaks for God to the people. The priest is one who speaks from the people, Old Testament system, speaks from the people to God. He's that mediator. So in chapter 7, verse 1, what does he do? I'm going to pray for you. And so down in verse 9, he offers a sacrifice. In my Bible, next to verse 9, I've got the word priest written. Who can offer a sacrifice? Only a priest can. And so he's interceding for them. As a prophet, he's interceding, telling them what God wants. As a priest, he's interceding, offering these sacrifices for them. And so God delivers, he delivers them. And I love how he does it. In verse 10, the Lord thundered with a loud thunder upon the Philistines that day, and he confused them so that they were overcome before Israel. Wouldn't that have been fun to see? God thundering a thunder on top of his enemy? It's what you want to do, right? So God takes care of them. He delivers them. You need to know verse 12. Samuel took a stone. He set it up between Mizpah and Shin. And what did he call the name of the stone? Ebenezer. That's what you would call a stone, right? Ebenezer. Why did he call it Ebenezer? Saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. Do you remember many times in the Old Testament where they would set up a stone or multiple stones? Why would they do that? Why would he give a name to this stone? It's a memory. It's to mark something so that when they saw that stone later, what would they remember when they saw the Ebenezer stone later?
God was with them.
God was when we were at this stone last time, God was helping us. The word Ebenezer means a stone of help. So every time they saw that stone, what's wrong? God was helping us here. If he was helping, he's always going to help us. It was a constant reminder for them. So that's why in that song we sing, it says, here I raise my Ebenezer. And sometimes, usually we'll skip verse 2 of that song because, what do you mean, here I raise my, I mean, if we sing that song in church, here I raise, O thou fount of every blessing is the song, 501 in the book, 500 in the book, O thou fount of every blessing. Second verse, here I raise my Ebenezer. Sometimes we'll skip that verse in worship. We don't always skip, we don't have to skip it. But sometimes we skip it because not everybody knows what Ebenezer is, right? So, I mean, we're going to have visitors here, and what are they thinking? They're singing about Scrooge. I mean, what's wrong with these people? They're raising their Scrooge. No. What's going on here? That song is based upon this point, and if Israel knew that this stone was the stone of help, a reminder that God has helped us, in that song, O thou fount of every blessing, here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come, and I hope by thy good measure safely to arrive at home. It's a reminder God has helped me to this point in my life, and if he's helped me to this point in my life, guess what he's going to keep doing? He's going to keep helping me, and that's what Israel needed to remember right here. Samuel's an amazing prophet. There's a lot you read about him and what he did to help God's people, and I hope a little bit of what we looked at tonight has been helpful for us. Thank you all very much for being here tonight.